Hi, I'm Jim Eves, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast, career advice from people in the business. Today, I'm joined by professional puppeteer Olly Taylor. Olly's been working on big budget movies and TV shows, including Star Wars The Force Awakens, Solo, A Star Wars Story, The Muppets Most Wanted, and as one of the lead puppeteers on the Netflix Dark Crystal series Age of Resistance. This one's a real insight in how to get into being a professional puppeteer, what it's like working on massive productions, and some of the practicalities of working as a puppeteer on set. Enjoy. Obviously, film industry, very competitive, especially if you want to be a cameraman, anything like that, super competitive. I'm imagining puppetry is even more competitive than that. So my first question is, if you wanted to get into being a professional puppeteer on big budget movies, what would your advice be initially to someone? What should they do?
Well, firstly, I'm not a competitive person. Well, is that true? Yes, I'm not a competitive person with anybody other than myself. So anything I ever do is just trying to improve what I do, very critical. But it is a competitive industry. But I think the bizarre thing, obviously, about puppetry is there will be times where there are auditions, and that's by its very nature a more competitive process. But because when you're a puppeteer, very rarely you do something in a vacuum. You're working with others, you're collaborating, you've got people a lot of the time in your physical space. So I think actually being competitive is counterproductive as a puppeteer. In an industry that is really competitive, if there's no sense of trust or um, uh, camaraderie between someone, you've got someone in your physical space. So I would, yeah, I would say it's a bizarre one. It's actually, in the world of puppetry, you kind of need to make friends, and you need to make. It's not it's not good enough to play the superficial niceties. When you're working with somebody for an extended period of time time time, you've really got to trust them, because they're in your space. They need to, if you're leading the performance or something, they need to be really intuitive and in tune with you. Not that as a performer you ever want to be predictable, but they need to know you enough that if you're going to improvise and you're leading it, that they can follow you as well. So yeah, I would say if you want to be a puppeteer, you need to make friends, and you need to make genuine friends, and because trust with it is the key, I would say.
And is there a certain, from your experience, is there a certain type of person who's a puppeteer, or do you get all sorts?
I think it's much broader than it was.
Mm.
I think there are a lot of performers now who would have started. I mean, it's a difficult one, because you've always got this idea that there are actors and then there are puppeteers, but essentially the best puppeteers are actually really good actors. They're just doing it through a particular medium and through a particular set of tools. But there are more performers now that I think have gone through, particularly the West End. There's been shows like Warhorse or Avenue Q. I mean, that's dating it a little bit, but after those shows, there's become more. More recently, there's Life of Pi and things like that, which are obviously theatrical rather than what we're talking about filmmaking. But I think that's given people more of a flavour of, oh, maybe I can expand my acting skills into this particular sort of niche. So there's those folks, and then there are people that have built their own worlds. We obviously we've got a tradition in the UK of people who are Punch and Judy men, but beyond that, there's a whole world of puppet theatre and people who don't even play in the theatres. They've got their own little acts, or that they travel around, take to places, set up the whole, it's their whole own little world. So there's those folks. um and then then there's other people, I suppose, that are a bit, though I've straddled a lot of things, there's people more akin to myself that have kind of always been puppeteers, and puppeteers particularly through the medium. So yeah, there's quite a different sort of route into it. But I think it's perhaps, as I say, perhaps it's a bit broader than it was. I mean, certainly when I started, because I was very keen to do all of the, my attraction was the performance of of character, but also the medium itself, because the medium of film with puppetry is quite different from the theatre. And having said, there are a lot of performers now that come into it via the theatre, via different areas in the theatre. Sometimes the leap to take those skills into the medium of film is quite different, because you're rather than honing a piece continually, you're you're kind of making it work for the shot, and then you're moving on, and then there's a whole technical understanding that you kind of need, because unlike other performers that come onto a set, into a film set, you try to avoid letting your actors, your human actors, watch the monitor that you're filming. Particularly like yourself, if you're a director, don't let them keep watching the rushes. But the way it works with the medium is that the puppeteer watches that frame, because every shot is a trick shot. So in some way, you need to be playing the character towards that shot. So those particular set of skills, not everybody can get their head around that, and they perhaps take a longer time to develop and to be really good at. But as I say, there's a broader. I've kind of felt like I've wandered off your question now.
That's all right. That's all right. It was all interesting stuff. So the line of puppetry, there's obviously lots of things going on there. If you were in a full suit, does that count, or do you call that something else?
Well, it depends. So you would. So when you mean like a full, what kind of?
I mean, like the guy in Alien, in his alien costume. Is he a puppeteer?
Now, yeah. So like the guy in Alien, that kind of, there will be a lot of the time those performers are termed skin performers.
Right.
So you'd be those performers obviously got great stamina, great physicality. Perhaps they lean more in from a mime, or maybe a dance background sometimes. And I suppose the difference where it becomes puppetry as opposed to like a skin performance is all to do with how it's being played in relation to the camera work, I would say. Okay. So if you're in a costume like Alien, it's, they used to wear it on top of their heads. I think their actual head was in the neck. Then you're inside looking out. Maybe that's the best way to say it. If you're inside looking out, then it's more of a skin performance. That said, if you're inside but you're watching yourself, because in some way, I suppose the best example of that kind of costume would be something like we did in the Dark Crystal, or people might understand from the world of Sesame Street, like Big Bird. So Big Bird, or the Mystics, or the Skeksis from Dark Crystal, the head is essentially being driven by your hand like a puppet, but you just happen to be in the entire body. So it's both a body performance and the puppetry performance in one. The difference being, because unlike your Alien example, is that inside you're watching the camera work, you're watching all of the monitors.
With that in mind, and since you're sort of straddling technical and artistic elements,
yes.
How does the hierarchy work on set? Who do you most often speak to? Is it the director or the first assistant director? How does it work? The sort of
well, I mean, you are, as I said, you are a performer, so you're giving a directable performance. So majority of the time, pretty much anything, even commercials, it's your proficiency at the puppetry needs to be such that they can come in and say, well, I want it to feel sad at this moment. It needs to look, you talk about the character in the third person, or even the animal or the creature. The floor generally is driven on any film set by the first AD. That they're usually upfront and physical. If for any reason the director's off, but then, as I say, like something like Dark Crystal, I mean, Louis Leterrier directed that, also operated a camera, the steady camera. So in that environment, we were in a raised set. We would be in the trenches, as it were, performing, and so would he be. So the camera would be there, and he'd then pull it to one side on his Steadicam rig and say, when you do this, I want you to do that. So that was very much all in the thick of it, you quite rightly observe that it is, it is technical as opposed to just the performance side of it, which does, you're coming into it, you've got to give this thing life, you've got to do the acting, you've got to, whether they're keeping your voice or not, a lot of the time you've got to know the dialogue, deliver the lines. If it's a talking character, you've got to understand the story. So you are giving that performance, so you need the director, but also you're very reliant on the tech. So when you're beginning to work with people who've not worked with puppets before, all of a sudden you develop a good relationship, not only with the first, but the DOP. If the DOP's camera operating as well, they become very, I can't tell you what it was, but it's something I was working on this year, and the DOP was great. And then you ask the questions that you need to ask to the director, and then when you're in the space and the DOP is right there, you go, so what framing are you going to next, and what size are you going to be at? And every shot with a puppet is a trick shot. So there's some element that the thing isn't real. You're both using your performance and the camera work to sell that. The whole purpose of watching a shot is so that the thing is looking in the right direction, but also that you can play off the other the other performers, be they other puppets or people. You need to read that scene and react in real time. So you do need to, you need to understand framing and the way the cut is going to work. Not that you're ever going to assemble it, but the more you've got your head around that, the more useful you are. I mean, my degree was not in performance, was in filmmaking, as you know.
So that course helped. Would you recommend that to someone else, or do they now do puppetry courses? How's it work?
Well, at the time, I decided it was going to be a particular. There were some puppetry courses out there. I think Central School Speech and Drama still got a course, but it didn't. None of that specifically catered for the fact that I wanted to be a puppeteer predominantly for television and film.
Obviously, in filmmaking, you do your course and you can go off and make short films and you can go and make your own feature films. Is your version of that doing theatre stuff, local theatre stuff, building your own puppets? Do you know what I mean? Is that how you get your show reel? Did you start with a show reel? What did you start with?
Well, in terms of my course, actually, there was a number of pieces. I don't know if I've ever shown them to you. I don't know where they are, but there was things that we'd crowbar a puppet or some puppetry element onto.
Yeah.
I can't even remember. There was one thing set in an office and there was a pot plant on the side, and it was this puppet I just had. And then at the end on the credit roll, it came out and ate something that had been on the side. It was something nothing to do with things. So yeah, I sort of crowbarred them in. In terms of how I was very fortunate in that I was doing my own thing with the puppet theatre stuff, and I was, making that all happen. And then even when I worked in a cinema and they discovered I did puppet stuff, so I ended up doing some things for them. But at the same time, I was very fortunate to make contact with a puppeteer who was ahead of me, more senior in the world of puppetry, and a puppeteer called Simon Buckley, who most notably, I suppose, if you're of that age, none of your podcast folks at university now would know, but they might have known. So he was doing, when I started doing stuff, he was doing things like a series called The Fimbles and Riley Moe and all of that stuff. But prior to that, he'd done Roger and the Rotten Trolls, and he was one of the leading puppeteers in Spitting Image in the 80s into the 90s. And I think he liked the fact that I was doing stuff. I think that is the thing. I think whether you're a puppeteer or you're a filmmaker, because that's my particular example of, he liked the fact I was doing stuff and doing my work. I wasn't making contact with him and going, please give me a job, please give me a job.
Yeah.
I am this thing, therefore give me a job. He appreciated that I was doing stuff, and I'd send him video of things I was doing, and he would give give a critique, honest critique of stuff, which is very helpful. And so he was always supported. And then, this will appeal to you. This idea is, I always thought, certainly when I was starting, is that the world of puppetry, particularly in television, was a bit like the Jedi, in that there was masters and there was apprentices. And when you start working, so Simon was very, very kind to put me forward to be, a lot of the time, his assistant puppeteer. So say if you think of most characters that you would know, there's somebody who's driving the head, who's driving the mouth, or giving the voice, and so that's your primary, that's your principal puppeteer. And then if it's got a lot of stuff happening, if it's animatronic stuff with its face, or it's got two arms in play, or multiple, or all four limbs, or whatever it is, then you would need a second, maybe even a third puppeteer to work collaboratively to bring that whole thing to life. So I'd be arms and legs and ears and bits and pieces on quite a bit of jobs for him. A lot of the time now, particularly things like commercials, there's a very short lead up time. And if you're being booked on something, everybody wants it to come in and it to work. So if there is yourself and then people that you work well with, you do bring them in, and it's not just mutually exclusive for puppeteers. That's what happens with the grip. It's like, bring the people in that know how to work with you, that are intuitive, that make everything efficient, because ultimately any production is looking for a level of efficiency to save money, ultimately.
I say this all the time to students. The number one thing a lot of people want, particularly for commercial stuff, corporate stuff, they don't want any ball ache. They want someone who's going to turn up on time, who knows how to do the job, and it's just going to be harmonious. So that element of turning up on time, just being professional and just being no hassle, is quite actually high on a lot of people's lists, because they know he's dependable. I can count on him. He'll deliver.
Yeah. So I think part of that was, part of it was very true. Is, when I was collaborating, working with Simon, there was a few people that he would often work with, and then just because other people were busy, then I was there, and he had a preference for using me on different things. And then, as you say, I think more broadly, people do go, oh well, we should get Olly, because we know that he's just going to sort this out, or he's not going to be a problem, or we've got the idea of how he works, or or so and so was a nightmare. Let's get rid of them and let's get them to come in. And that that does happen, because at the end of the day, the whole industry, it's all people. It's all being driven by people, and it's like any working environment that does need to be harmonious.
Yeah, I just want to, well, and also you kind of want to enjoy your job, don't you? You don't want to turn up and be
exactly.
an absolute slog. I think the thing that's potentially intimidating, if you're just starting out, is you turn up on this set and you don't want to be Barry Big Mouth, chatting to everyone.
I'm terrible. I'm not a good networker. I'm not that person. I can't be insincere. I always think of it like this: is that there's lots of actors out there. There's lots of cameramen out there. There's lots of puppeteers out there. Well, that's sort of more niche things, so people know who people are. And there is, I suppose you could, it's arguable, so and so is the best DOP, or so and so's got this skill. Yeah, there's a spectrum, isn't there? But there's going to be more than one person at one end, and everything like that. The only thing at the end of the day that you've got to sell, that you're selling, is you. There is nothing. People. Why do people want to book you as the cameraman? Why do they want to book you as the puppeteer? Yes, all right. If you're cast as something, you're doing the role that they want you to do. You're giving that kind of performance, but it's uniquely you. That your individuality is what makes it different from somebody else's puppet. You could look at the puppetry skill and go, oh, well, technically they're kind of about the same, or that person's a really good focus puller at that kind of skill. But so being yourself, I think, is the most important thing, and knowing your place, knowing when it's your business and when it's not your business.
That is a interesting one. That is a really
Because
interesting one.
a lot of performers, they've they're very, performers particularly are very passionate. Obviously, that's what you're paying them to be. You want them to be emotive. But when they're not saying the lines or in the place, they're still being emotive. And some performers will care about everything that's happening and feel it's all their responsibility and that they've got something to say on everything. Well, no, because film is still, what makes it efficient is there still is a hierarchy in it, and that's not a hierarchy of, it's not a hierarchy that exists outside in society that we don't want there to be. This is, this is an arbitrary hierarchy based on getting the thing done. There's someone who's directing it, so they're in charge. If they, a good director will want you to come in and go, oh, well, this is my, give your delivery on it, or have some ideas. Of course, they want you to be creative, but if they don't want to use your ideas, that's it.
And it's not just ideas. It's that knowing. Obviously, your idea might be the thing that saves the issue. There's an issue with something, and you've got a little idea that can fix that. Perfect. There's a time and place for that. But that I've had that before, where you get somebody come on set, and they're not doing it to be rude, but sometimes it can come across as rude because you're advising everybody, and everyone's got their own job to do. The classic one I remember is we had a runner on a feature film, and this was just a misunderstanding, but everyone was, we'd done, like micro budget. We'd been filming all day. We're really tired. It was really dragging, and I turned around and said, "Tea, cafe." Meaning, do you want to get everyone a tea? And she went, "No, I'm good, thanks." And then went back to her book. Now that's completely different. That's nothing to do with this. But I have had people on set before who've overstepped, and overstepping, it makes everybody fringe up, doesn't it?
It's cringeworthy, and I would say a lot of the time it's because actually they're not listening or they're not observing. The best thing you can do is keep your eyes and your ears open. Is you're not eavesdropping on stuff, but if a conversation's happening on set and it's open and you're aware something is going to change, then don't allow your mind to wander off and get your phone out, and you're there to be attentive. And then if things change and you're already on the ball, then there won't be any problems.
And talking of efficiency, so when I came down to the Dark Crystal set, what I was surprised at was how quickly things went from very chilled to filming and then back again. So it sort of seemed to everyone's just sort of milling around, just chatting, quite casual, and then bang, it's on, camera's rolling, everybody's focused in, and then it cuts, and then everyone goes back to chilled. Is that your experience of most sets, or is that particular to that particular set?
It was the sequence that you were watching, I seem to recall, was more of an action sequence, which the irony of that, of course, is because most of action is often driven through the cut and through the edit, is those moments are very short-lived. So I think you were watching, there was a setup with a monster coming in trying to grab someone or something like that, and that moment takes quite a while to set up. Then you've got a good go at it, or a good couple of goes, and then that moment breaks down, in which case it needs resetting again. So those kind of things, the action sometimes can take ages, because it's driven by, if it was specifically it's just driven by the car. Whereas it's somewhat different if you're playing out a 2-minute scene or or longer, then it's a different level of concentration. Like if you're having if you're personally, if you're stood there delivering there's pages of dialogue, you don't want a load of chat, because they might be saying stuff that's really interesting that you want to go and chat about. Yeah, and that sounds very actory, but actually, it's really when you're put in those situations, you realise, oh yeah, no, you don't want to be that person.
There is a mood, isn't there? There's like a level of
Yeah, and
something.
particularly if those scenes are, if those scenes are quite intense, because you do it quite a lot of time. I mean, I was sad that when you didn't, that I wasn't actually doing anything when you came to see that show, but there was lots of intense scenes I was doing as the scientist in the lab, and the big sequences that would play out with lots of, Louis liked to play the scenes as long as we physically could, because he'd get long passes on all these different shot sizes, so he could assemble it in the edit. So sometimes you don't actually see in the edit that we do really complicated things like come into the room, pick up and handle a load of props, deliver loads of lines, pay out the whole scene, and leave again. But because he liked the flow through all of his different rushes, so that he could, I suppose it gives him the freedom to kind of dip in and out of most, it gives him essentially more options.
So how does it work for you, or how would it work for somebody new? Is a show reel important to get, what obviously you've got people recommending you, but if you're going up for a job, what do people look at? Your website, how do they kind of go, oh yeah, he's good?
Yeah, so I think it's the chicken and egg of the whole industry. It's like you've got to be good at whatever it is you're presenting that you do. But how do people know you're good unless you've done stuff? But you can't do it. It does take a while to get any kind of momentum going, and I think that's across the board with whatever you're doing. But in terms of the puppetry stuff, I mean, I've had a show reel. I mean, I think the last time I edited one together was about 10 years ago, but that's literally because I just haven't had the time to do it. I think that's a good start if you've got some stuff, even if that's stuff that you were doing at home, like as I said, if you want to be a puppeteer in the medium, then I mean, it's not even as difficult as it used to be. Get your iPhone out and set it up, and watch some shows that are shot with puppets in, observe the framing, get an understanding of how it will work. And if you haven't got anything you're in, then get used to that as a technique, because you can't just expect to walk in. There's a level of understanding of balancing your hand out, if it's a hand puppet or whatever, or balancing the character out on the frame, that you're going to have to know from day one. Very rare are the jobs now. When there was big series like the Spitting Image shows, there was more this idea of people could come in, do arms and legs and be more assisty, and then there was more time because these things were running for ages and people could build up to being the whole character. So that's a lot more difficult. But on the flip side of that, you've got the tech in your house, in the palm of your hand. Can you sort of start setting that up? So yes, definitely, puppetry is a doing art form. So do stuff, whatever that. If you're that interested in it, then do it.
Are you good at doing things backwards? Do you have to be? Do you have to be good at sort of, if you're watching a monitor, aren't you always the wrong way around? Or
so there's two. Yeah, if you want to ask about monitors, so there's what you would call reverse scan and straight scan. So straight scan is obviously what the camera sees it in all of the time, and then normally a lot of monitors have now got mirror or a little switch or something like that, or it's in the menu. Historically, majority of UK puppeteers have worked reverse scan, so it's like a mirror image, because when bigger productions started, they could do it. But historically, the American performers, because of taking this technique from Jim Henson, they worked straight scan, because in the 50s you couldn't flip the monitor back the other way. So there's the two schools of thought, but actually I do work straight scan because it's fine with all those shows where it's a nice like children's puppet show and you're behind a table, or it's a raised set and all of that, and they were filming in that very traditional way, then they would just watch it like a mirror. But I've had so many awkward jobs and particularly doing a lot of this stuff with the goggles, is you need to see the environment as as it actually is.
Yeah.
So I've just got my head round. Yes, I do observe the world from the camera's point of view. So so if you're blinded to it, you'd go into the room and you go, all right, the lamp's over there, the chair's over there, got that in my head. And then when the camera's looking at it from how you looked at it when you stood in the room, you work on that way because you can't see out. But a lot of the time as well, I did loads of jobs where the camera's pointing at me, but physically my body is orientated the other way. So actually, the whole working with a mirror thing, essentially your brain is flipping the scan all of the time when if you're not straight facing the camera. So as a result, when I started on jobs, it was all reversed scan. That was everybody's preference, to look at it like a mirror. But subsequently, I now just watch it as it's intended. And the other thing that happened as well, there was a whole phase where when all the monitors became more digital, a lot of them didn't have the switching capability. So it would go through a video desk to be processed. And going through the computer to be processed would create a frame lag. So you'd go, I think you'd be trying to do something like lip sync, and it would be a couple of frames behind. It's just impossible. So, or it's not impossible, but you just start losing trust in yourself, and everyone goes, "Oh, isn't it wrong?" So yes, so I do watch the world as the director sees it, and that works fine for me. But other methods are available. There are people that are very
well. That's something you could. That's a good skill to practice at home, isn't it? Is filming yourself in different ways and figuring out how that works, and because that would completely bamboozle me. There's no way I'd be able to do either mirroring or non. I think I'd always be looking the wrong way, or I'd be.
Well, you manage to brush your hair in the morning and brush your teeth without
barely.
Teeth. But that's one thing to watch. Obviously, if you're using a phone, the image you see of yourself FaceTiming somebody else is mirrored because everybody's used to looking at a mirror. But obviously, if you're doing what we're talking about, then really you see if you are any good at just seeing what the camera sees.
Thanks for listening. Please do make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode of the Honest Filmmaker Podcast. Career advice from people in the business.